On the 24th of December 2023, a 26-year-old member of Ireland's infamous Gucci gang walked into Brown's Steakhouse in Blanchardstown, Dublin. Armed with an automatic pistol, the young guy had his eyes set on his target, 47-year-old Jason Hennessy Sr., a member of the rival Hennessy Gang. Unfortunately, things did not end well for both individuals as they lost their lives tragically amidst the shootout. This is the bone-chilling story of Tristan Sherry, a Gucci gang member from Finglas, who lost his life shortly after fatally shooting Jason Hennessy. It was Christmas Eve, and Jason Hennessy was in Brown's Steakhouse, enjoying dinner. At around 8 p.m., Tristan walked in with a gun in his hand, looking keenly for Jason. He was there to seal his fate, probably because of a gang-related feud. However, he had no idea that he would meet his end in the very same place. As soon as he saw Jason, he opened fire. The entire restaurant was engulfed in a state of panic while people with their wives and kids tried to hide under the tables. When he realized that he had hit the target, he tried to escape from a locked door. However, there was no way out for him now. Tristan was stopped within a few seconds of opening fire, and he was stuck in the restaurant with the man he shot and his guards. Jason Hennessy had already taken bullets to his neck and chest as he lay on the floor, struggling to breathe. Meanwhile, his guards took control of Tristan, putting him on the floor and beating him mercilessly. Eyewitnesses and coroners later reported that Sherry was disarmed, beaten, and stabbed at least 30 times, all to the point where he lost his life. Instantly, the Garda E, the National Police of Ireland, reached the crime scene and detectives took over. Everything in the steakhouse was a piece of evidence related to the horrendous crime that took place. Therefore, it was imperative that nothing be touched or moved. After their preliminary investigation, the detectives said that the steakhouse attack on Jason Hennessy could be spontaneous. However, some hinted that Sherry's gangland associates may have encouraged him to carry out the attack. The police also reported that Jason Hennessy was in a vegetative state, and he was shifted to Dublin's Connolly Hospital immediately. But unfortunately, as he got to the hospital, Jason was already fighting for his life due to the gunshot wounds. And from this point onwards, the downfall of Dublin's most notorious criminal gang, the Hennessy Gang, began. The Hennessy Gang operated under the guise of various legitimate businesses, such as a towing company by the name of Hulk Recovery. They used this dual identity to maintain respect in society, while operating their illegal businesses behind the scenes. The Gucci Gang, on the other hand, rose to fame in Finglas, North Dublin. The leader of this gang was Glenn, who also went by the name of Mr. Flashy. They were notoriously known for flashy lifestyles and violent acts, primarily because the gang had direct ties to the Kinahan cartel. This affiliation with one of the most powerful organizations in Ireland gave them the power to expand their business in the Hennessy Gang territory. Despite knowing the severe consequences of taking over another rival gang's territory, the Gucci Gang made their move. Because of that, tensions arose between the two groups, leading to various violent attacks on each other. By 2019, this feud increased to the point where a daylight shootout occurred in Corduff, and it was captured on CCTV. Retaliatory attacks kept taking place, and several members from each group were injured. However, they never reached a peace agreement. Police patrols, surveillance, and plans to intercept their criminal activities kept increasing, but the gang members never backed down. Because of that, many have assumed that Sherry entered the steakhouse and attacked the Hennessy Gang leader as a power move. The Gucci Gang wanted to show that they were more powerful than their rivals, and this was the perfect opportunity. However, they had no idea that they would also lose one of their own in the crossfire. Nonetheless, their main goal of bringing down the Hennessy Gang was achieved. On 5th January 2024, just a couple of weeks after the shooting, Jason Hennessy Sr. lost his life on the hospital bed. He had gunshot wounds in his neck and upper torso, which led to a lot of blood loss. Despite fighting for his life for 11 days, his organs eventually gave up, leading to his demise. After this news became public, the Hennessy Gang's era came to an end. A power vacuum was left in Dublin's criminal underworld, and the Gucci Gang wanted to fill this gap. However, because of the police investigations into the double murder, making any move right now was impossible. The Irish police had launched a comprehensive citywide investigation into the incident. CCTV footage from the steakhouse was recovered, which clearly showed the shootout taking place as the customers tried to hide themselves under tables and behind chairs. Another video recorded by a person inside the steakhouse showed a lifeless body on the floor with blood all around. This horrifying scene showed how gruesome the shooting was and how traumatic it would have been for the customers inside with their families. Following the CCTV footage and the accounts of witnesses, the Irish police force focused their investigation on identifying another gunman who entered with Sherry. They also wanted to find any masterminds behind this plan because that would make the case easier to solve. Finding the motive and the perpetrators behind this attack was imperative. Unfortunately, after weeks of investigations, the police had no idea who was behind the shooting of Jason Hennessy. One gunman had been eliminated on the spot, while the other one was nowhere to be found. But this didn't mean that the case was over. It was still a double homicide, and finding the men who mercilessly took the life of Tristan Sherry was equally important. The first order of business was to identify who the second man was with Tristan Sherry. Legal action had already been taken, and 6 men, including the son of Jason Hennessy, were put on trial in a non-jury court in November 2024. During the court hearings, Detective Garda Chris Durant told the prosecutor Fiona Murphy that when he reached the scene, he saw a dark-colored Hyundai Tucson take off at speed towards the roundabout for the N3 and M50. The detective then walked into the restaurant, where he saw a body surrounded by blood, while members of the Dublin Fire Brigade attended to it. Unfortunately, no one ever found out who the second man was who entered with Sherry. However, the silver lining was that out of the 6 arrested men, 5 confessed to being rightly identified in the CCTV footage played in court. Michael Andricut of Sheephill Avenue, Blanchardstown, was seen kicking Sherry several times as he lay on the ground. He used a butter knife to stab him repeatedly and also hit him with a chair. He then smashed 2 glasses over his head before pausing for a moment. Seconds later, he started attacking Sherry again and took pictures of assaulting him with his mobile phone. David Armour, a 19-year-old teenager of Hazel Grove, Donabate, also pushed through the crowd surrounding Sherry to stomp on him repeatedly. The CCTV footage also showed Armour stabbing Sherry and hitting him with a chair. Just like Andricut, Emma also used his mobile phone to record the attack and make videos of himself while mercilessly stomping and stabbing Sherry. Another teenager who was a juvenile at the time ran to the bathroom as soon as the 2 gunmen, including Sherry, entered the restaurant. However, after a few moments, he returned and helped move the wounded body of Jason Hennessy Sr. When he returned to the restaurant, the CCTV footage captured him stabbing Sherry and stamping on his head. According to the reports, the unnamed juvenile stabbed Sherry at least 10 times. Jairus Kumbu, a 19-year-old from Brookhaven Grove, Blanchardstown, was also seen picking up Sherry's weapon from a table and leaving the restaurant. To date, the weapon, which was used to eliminate Jason Hennessy Sr., has not been found. However, Jairus Kumbu was arrested and put on trial. And lastly, Noah Musueni, an 18-year-old from Corduff Park, Blanchardstown, was also accused of taking the life of Tristan Sherry. All of the accused pleaded not guilty in the special criminal court, but the evidence against them was too strong. The trial went on for months before the judge reached a verdict. In February 2025, 3 men, Michael Andricut, David Amar, and Noah Musueni, were found guilty of taking the life of Tristan Sherry on Christmas Eve in 2023. The court awarded all 3 mandatory life sentences. However, since David Amar and Noah Musueni were both 17 at the time of the crime, the mandatory life sentences did not apply. Their sentencing details are pending with considerations for their age at the time of the offense. 4 others, including Jairus Kumbu, Brandon Hennessy, Jonas Kabangu, and Diarmuid O'Brien, were also convicted of violent disorder. Jairus Kumbu was sentenced to 2 years in February 2025, whereas the sentences of the remaining 3 are still pending. After the sentences were handed over, the Irish police also carried out a massive crackdown against the Gucci Gang and Mr. Flashy. In April 2025, he was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for firing an AR-15 rifle at a house party in 2022. His younger brother, Eric O'Driscoll, also received a 5-year prison sentence for using the same weapon. Both the Gucci Gang and the Hennessy Gang have been taken down now, Their leaders are in prison or resting eternally. The Irish police say that the imprisonment of Glenn Ward and the fall of the Hennessy Gang is a significant victory for law enforcement and their fight against organized crime in Dublin. But despite the gangs being taken down, the shooting of Christmas Eve in 2023 has left a significant impact on Dublin's residents. They say that these deaths are the prime example of Dublin's ongoing struggle with gang violence. It's a brutal reality, one that has devastating effects on the local communities. And that will be all for today's video. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more criminal gang stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. On February 12th, 2025, Barry Moore arrived at the Hennessy's home and was let in through a black steel door by Jade Hennessy, a female relative of the brothers, believing he was meeting people he had known his whole life. But what he encountered changed his life forever. Moore was branded, tortured, and severely burned. This attack was one in a series of violent incidents that has taken place in Dublin since the assault on Jason Hennessy Sr., the Hennessy Gang's leader, on Christmas Eve 2023. Moore had been associated with the Hennessy Gang, a notorious crime group operating in West Dublin, throughout his entire life. Moore was suspected of committing the ultimate betrayal, ratting them out to the authorities. As a result, his relationship with the gang took a deadly turn. Earlier that week, police had seized firearms and drugs from a field in Corduff, and the gang believed Moore had leaked the information to authorities. In their world, there was only one punishment for such action, and that's elimination. The Hennessy brothers, sons of the late Hennessy Sr., were determined to uphold their family's violent reputation. Since their father's murder, they had become hungrier for power, getting it through violence, drug dealing, and intimidation. Joining them in their operation were Kenneth Fitzsimons and his son, Dean Fitzsimons. They were close associates of the gang and deeply embedded in its operation, ensuring that anyone who crossed the Hennessys paid the ultimate price. On the day of the incident, when Moore arrived at the house, everything seemed normal at first. But then, suddenly, Jason Jr. grabbed Moore's phone right out of his hand. Before Moore could react, Jason punched him in the face and demanded he tell the truth. But they didn't tell him which truth exactly they wanted. They had already made up their minds that Moore was a rat, and he was going to pay the price. At some point, Kenneth Fitzsimons brought out a 5-foot steel bar. He swung it at Moore's legs, hitting him over and over again with full force. Then, Brandon, the youngest of the three brothers, took the bar from him and kept beating Moore all over his body. But the worst was when Jason Jr. pulled out a branding iron with the word "rat" engraved boldly on it and said, "He'll talk after this." He pulled out a camping stove, lit it, and started heating the iron. After some time, they decided that the iron was hot enough, and Jason Jr. took it and pressed it against Moore's stomach, not once, but 6 times. Moments before this, Kenneth's son, Dean, joined in the attack, riding an electric bike straight at Moore, running over his legs. As Moore groaned in pain, Dean laughed and said, "I've been waiting for you," attesting to the fact that the attack wasn't spontaneous. Dean then picked up the steel bar and started hitting Moore. He also grabbed an axe, flipped it around, and started hitting him with the blunt end of the weapon. The attack lasted for around 20 minutes, and the helpless Moore had no way to fight back. As Moore writhed in pain, Jason demanded to know who set them up. But no matter how much Moore insisted he didn't know, Jason didn't believe him. To make his point, he branded Moore's face with the hot iron. Then the violence almost took an even darker turn when Brandon suggested they pull down Moore's tracksuit bottoms and violate him with a stick. Luckily, that never happened. They went on to threaten to burn his house down and torture him while his children watched. But in the end, they did none of that. Instead, just as suddenly as the attack had begun, they decided to let him go. But before Moore could leave, they wiped his phone and deleted all his messages. Barely able to stand from the severe injuries, he stumbled out of the house. Somehow he managed to drive to a relative's home before collapsing. Sensing that something horrific had happened, the relative quickly called the emergency service. Moore was rushed to the hospital, and doctors quickly assessed his injuries. While he was stabilized, it was immediately clear that he had suffered extensive trauma. Burns covered 3 to 4% of his body, and he had deep bruising, possible fractures, and severe swelling. On February 13th, Moore gave a full statement to the Gardaí, detailing every horrifying moment of the attack. With his testimony in hand, law enforcement swiftly obtained search and arrest warrants for multiple properties linked to the gang. 2 days later, more than 100 officers launched simultaneous raids across Corduff and Blanchardstown, with the Hennessy's family home being one of their primary targets. They forced their way inside the residence, securing it within minutes. In the backyard, they found a small garden believed to be the place Moore was interrogated and tortured. By the end of the operation, all 5 men were taken into custody. All the men were charged with assault, causing serious harm and false imprisonment, both of which carry potential life sentences. They also faced charges for producing weapons during a dispute, referring to the branding iron, steel bars, and axe used in the attack. Despite the overwhelming evidence against them, the accused remained defiant in court. Dean Fitzsimons became aggressive, shouting at officers and telling them to F off before eventually apologizing to the judge. Shortly after, Jason also disrupted the proceedings, angrily denying ownership of several vehicles linked to him. Judge Paula Murphy eventually denied bail, ruling that the men posed a serious risk to witnesses and public safety. All 5 were remanded in custody and sent to Clover Hill Prison. With their leaders behind bars, the Hennessy Gang's grip on Corduff was shattered. For years, they had ruled through violence and intimidation, but their tactics had finally backfired. Due to their own paranoia, they turned on one of their own and eventually fell into a trap. The patriarch of the gang, late Hennessy Sr., had built a reputation as a dangerous and deadly figure, deeply entrenched in organized crime, drug trafficking, and feud. But despite growing up surrounded by crime, Hennessy Sr. initially led a relatively normal life. As a young man, he was a promising boxer, and for most of his adulthood, he avoided serious criminal activities. He worked various jobs, including as a truck driver, and managed to stay out of trouble, even while living in Sheep Hill Avenue, Corduff, an area deeply entrenched in gang culture. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the neighborhood was controlled by the Westies gang, which dominated the heroin trade in Dublin. When the gang collapsed following the murders of its leaders, Shane Coates and Stephen Sugg, in Spain in 2004, a power vacuum emerged. Various factions rose to fill the void, and while Hennessy's friends and family members became involved in these successor gangs, he remained largely uninvolved. However, that changed in 2016 when he had his first major run-in with the law. He was charged, along with a family member, for engaging in threatening and abusive behavior, and for resisting or willfully obstructing Gardaí during a dispute near his home in Corduff. More serious charges were to follow. In 2022, he found himself in court facing serious charges of money laundering. He was accused of possessing €3,050 in criminal proceeds at a Bank of Ireland branch in Blanchardstown and of being in possession of a stolen Suzuki motorbike. His case was set to go before a jury in 2025, and he was even granted legal aid after the court heard he was earning just €350 a week. The charges represented only a tiny fraction of the suspected offense carried out by Hennessy and his associates. Gardaí suspected that Hennessy and his crew were running a massive drug operation, using intimidation tactics to keep their grip on the streets of West Dublin. These criminal enterprises brought gang members into conflict with several rival groups. One of the feuds led to dozens of violent incidents, including arson attacks, shootings, and assaults throughout 2018 and 2019. In one incident, shots were fired at a man outside Riversdale Community College in Corduff as he waited for a relative to finish school. More recently, Hennessy's fellow criminals clashed with associates of Tristan Sherry from Finglas, who was seen by Gardaí as a low-level organized crime figure. After attacking one of Hennessy's associates in 2023, Sherry found himself on the receiving end of a violent retaliation. This culminated in the events of December 24th, when Sherry and one other man stormed into Brown's steakhouse in Blanchardstown, armed with a machine pistol. They opened fire, hitting Hennessy in the neck. But this wasn't going to be a clean hit and run. Members of Hennessy's group tackled Sherry, and what followed was absolute chaos. Sherry was beaten and stabbed to death right there in the restaurant. As for Hennessy, he was rushed to the hospital by a family member where doctors were able to stabilize his condition, but he was pronounced dead a week later. 6 men were later charged for Sherry's murder. Similar to their father, the Hennessy's brothers are also deeply involved in the criminal world, and without their father's influence, their actions became even more reckless and violent. Devin Hennessy, the eldest, had long been involved in the Corduff feud, a brutal gang war filled with shootings, stabbings, and firebomb attacks. Authorities repeatedly warned him that he was a marked man, even issuing a Garda information message in 2024. But Devin wasn't one to lay low. Just months after his father's murder, in August 2024, he survived an assassination attempt while driving a bulletproof BMW. This wasn't his first brush with death either. Back in 2019, another car he was in was shot at 5 times. He walked away unharmed, but when questioned by Garda, he refused to cooperate. In March 2020, Devin was convicted of violent disorder after attacking a man outside a courthouse. The situation got so out of hand that it took 20 officers to restrain him, but his criminal record didn't end there. In September 2024, despite the numerous threats on his life, Devin was caught with a stash of cocaine near Clover Hill Prison and convicted of drug dealing. Even with a target on his back, he refused to back down from the drug trade. Jason Hennessy Jr., the middle brother, was easily the most aggressive of the 3. His reputation for violent outbursts wasn't just gang-related. Some of his attacks seemed completely unprovoked. Back in 2018, he received a 2-year suspended sentence for a brutal hammer attack in Dublin city centre. Jason had gone to his car, grabbed a hammer and an iron bar, and attacked 2 men. One victim suffered a 4-centimeter head wound, while the other ended up with tendon damage to his fingers. In 2022, Jason was convicted of assaulting 2 female officers after they stopped a family member on suspicion of driving without insurance. Instead of complying, he spat in one officer's face. And when he was taken into custody, he had the audacity to laugh at the judge, saying he expected the court to be biased, but didn't care, because he got 4 weeks off. Despite being the youngest of the 3 brothers, Brandon Hennessy was already deeply involved in the criminal world by the time he turned 17. In January 2021, authorities caught him burying cocaine worth over €32,000 near Blanchardstown. He was part of a surveillance operation, and when officers moved in, he tried to flee, but was eventually caught and arrested. 3 years later, in early 2025, Brandon was given a 3-year suspended sentence for drug trafficking. After their father's death, the Hennessy brothers launched a violent campaign of terror in Corduff. Anyone they perceived as a threat was targeted, and firebomb attacks became frequent, often with innocent families caught in the crossfire. But Barrymore's attack was where authorities drew the line. They believed the gang was losing control, making reckless and irrational decisions. And with mounting evidence against them, this could very well be the final act that sealed the Hennessy Gang downfall. And that will be all for today's video. Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications for more criminal gang stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.